Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Tonight's broadcast features the original Stiltwalker encounter from back in 2008 and sightings from the last 15 years. Okay, so I started a thread on /b/ about this, and they said it was /x/territory. I've never really been to this board, so pardon any offenses I commit to /x/customs. I know the reputation of anyone coming from /b/ to another board, but I hope you can look past that and give me some help here. I live in the Texas Hill Country by a river in a small town, and I had some co-workers over tonight. One of them hadn't seen my river yet, and I'd been telling her how awesome it was, but it was raining when they got here. It just stopped raining a little bit ago, so we all walked down to the river in the moonlight to check it out. You have to walk down this tree-lined path off the road, which takes a turn and goes downhill to the river. There's a bank on the other side covered with trees that goes back maybe 15 yards from the edge of the water until it reaches a cliff wall that goes up maybe 10 yards and is pretty steep. It's dark, but the moon is giving us some light because Texas weather can never make up its mind if it's raining or clear, and our eyes have adjusted at this point. We brought a couple beers with us, and we're sitting on the rocks talking. My buddy Jarrett is sitting across from me with his girlfriend, and this new girl is sitting next to me. He's in the middle of a sentence, looking between me and the girl next to me, when he looks back over both of our shoulders, widens his eyes, and cuts off what he was saying with "holy shit" in this really quiet voice. We turn around, and I barely have time to register what I'm seeing because it was dark. There was something black about half as tall as the cliff, so 15 feet tallish, on these extremely spindly legs, noiselessly sprinting through the trees on the opposite bank. I couldn't make out the shape too well, but my impression was that it was covered in long hair, and its body and head were kind of like a dog looking down, but stretched longer. Most of its height was in its legs, which were really thin. Jarrett turned on the flashlight and shone it across the water at the thing, and it stopped moving and turned to look at us. It had humongous eyes that reflected the light from the flashlight. After a split second of this, it turned away from us and just scaled the cliff as easily as it was striding across the ground and disappeared from sight. We stared for a second, and then we just ran back to my house. We shat bricks over what we saw, and then they all just went home. All four of us saw the thing, and we all seemed to be in agreement on what it looked like. I think my heart rate finally went back to normal just before I started writing this, and now it's back up. What happens now? Do I call animal control or something? I don't know what this thing is, if it's dangerous or what. I don't want to go outside or even look out my window at the trees. Also, I didn't score with the new girl, and we left like 5 unopened beers on the bank of the river. What the hell? Everything after the first paragraph was copy-pasta from my /b/thread.
It's depressing that /b/ refers people here, but okay. If it doesn't stalk you or haunt the area, you don't need to worry about it. If it takes an interest in you, then you'll have to either identify it to determine the means of dispelling it, or find a legitimate expert. LOL, good luck.
Maybe some sort of dog or something that was illuminated from behind and therefore had long shadows coming off of its legs? Dunno, but it's pretty neat.
We didn't shine the light on it until later. When we first saw it, the light wasn't on. Also, it was running really goddamn fast. Too fast for something that had normal dog-sized legs. Also, it just strode up the cliff like it wasn't any big deal. It took it like 3 steps.
Are you serious? Eyes red or green? And when it scaled the cliff, did it actually scale it, or did it just sort of glide up it like it didn't particularly care where it put its feet? Like a bad clipping issue in a video game. Like bending of its knees and shit that you normally need to walk with didn't really matter or apply to it.
I don't know. I think they were more white. There was definitely knee bending going on when it was climbing the cliff, but it didn't make a sound. Granted, there was the sound of the river, but you'd think something that big would make more noise.
We're in Texas, OP.
Little town called Wimberley.
White? I'm attributing that to the glow of the light, but the no sound thing is right. When I said the legs, though, I meant did the motions match up with its actual progress, or did it just sort of effortlessly fly up it without really looking? Like, were the steps planned, or was it too fast to even make sense? Did you get a weird striking sensation that whatever the hell it was alien and strange, and that it really had little to no interest in you, or even that you saw it? Like you just felt it?
I don't know, man. It did seem pretty impossibly fast, both the way it ran and the way it climbed the cliff wall. I don't know if its legs matched its progress, but I do have the impression that it took steps to get up. I couldn't tell you if that's how it actually happened, or if that's my mind filling in the details, though.
Last question. You've been fairly helpful so far. Was it impossibly fast, as in like a blur of motion, too fast to be real, or impossibly fast, like nothing on Earth should be able to traverse a cliff and trees like that? Like, did it actually take precautions to avoid obstacles, or was it just stepping without looking like second nature?
Fast, like nothing should be able to traverse trees and a cliff like that. I didn't get the impression that it was trying to dodge trees or plan its steps, but I did get the impression that it was taking them. Now that you mention it, it would have had to have run into some branches or something, but I don't remember if it disturbed the trees as it passed or not.
Hell yes. This is exactly what I needed to hear. Thank you, man. Back here tomorrow night, assuming I don't get waylaid, I promise.
I think I saw something similar in Maryland. I was on my aunt's farm and it was late around 11, and my cousins and I were following this stream through the forest for no particular reason. I had this weird feeling, like the forest was angry, and everything in it seemed agitated and on edge. My cousin pointed out something weird he saw in the trees. We stared at it for a few seconds before we realized it seemed to be staring back. All we could make out were what might have been eyes, and it seemed like there were some odd trees beneath it, possibly legs similar to OP's thing. We stared at it trying to comprehend WTF we were looking at, then suddenly we couldn't see it anymore. Don't remember it moving or anything, just suddenly we couldn't make it out anymore. We slowly walked back to the house, because for some reason we thought tearing ass out of the woods making noise would be a bad thing.
Beaver Creek Conservation Area is in Saskatchewan, Canada, just on the north border of the USA and only a hop, skip, and a leap away from the Dundurn military base. It feeds right through Brightwater and into the Saskatoon River, which the nearby city is built around. The Stiltwalker, as you have labeled it, has made an appearance here. How do I know? I saw it. There's 5 trails in the park labeled with road markers: red, blue, green, yellow, and orange. Taking the green and the orange route when they meet puts you on a double-digit kilometer hike way out into the plains, the forest, and the river before looping back far past the visitor center, which is the only building currently in use for miles. However, what I saw was thus. In the picture you can see a bend in the creek that goes gently downhill. The water is very shallow this time of year, and there's all sorts of beautiful foliage around here. I am the white dot, roughly to scale. The little ones are the trail back to the red path out from the center that I had strayed off towards a dam built by the creek's namesake off to the right. The creek really swells and rages in the spring, though after the 80 feet of snow we get in Canada melts and the dunes and banks are composed mainly of clay and fine silt and sand, so it's common to see 10 to 20 foot high walls around it, layered with multiple colors of clay like a birthday cake. A 16 or 18 foot high one is directly across from me, with me being almost at river level, crouched on a dune poking minnows with a stick. After sitting there almost a full half hour, I clue into the fact that everything has gone really quiet, and save for the creek's soft babbling and my own breathing, it's almost completely silent. It's very late in the evening and starting to get really dim as winter approaches and the light goes out faster. I'm washed over with a sudden feeling of anxiety, and a weird alienness sort of pervades the area. All of the birds are gone or silent, perhaps hidden among the poplar branches, and the whirligig beetles seem to be the only thing intent on staying. I look up straight at the trees cresting the opposite bank, pouring their roots over like blood welling from a shallow cut, and I see movement. The place is known for deer, muskrats, and even mountain cats occasionally, but what was odd was despite the brief flicker of action, there's no rustling going on and I hear nothing. Freaked out but adolescently excited, I pursue. I rush off across the top of the Beaver Dam, not terribly careful of weak branches because of the low water level, and into the poplar and ash grove across the creek. My buds are a ways back and admiring the bridge further back on the trail, and so I figure if I get lost, I can just shout. As soon as I break into the grove, the ambient light level drops by about 30%. Poplars grow very tall and straight, and the canopy is very high up, flat, thick, and cool. My eyes adjust to the dim light, and my shoes are covered with muck from the rainwater still plopping off the leaves. We came after a storm, otherwise the creek would have no life in it at all. A few breaths pass and I see something. Off a few dozen meters, I see a couple of long, skinny trees moving. My puzzled brain takes a few moments to rearrange what I'm seeing, and I'm hit with it. I get a sudden flash of an impossibly tall thing, striding about the grove. This thing, I would later describe to nobody, was about half the height of the trees, so about 18 feet tall is my guess time it. Almost all legs. The weird shape of it blended in with the forest of straight shafts of wood almost perfectly. The thing is covered in a thick dripping coat of moss or fur or hair or something. The light is too washed out and dim to make out any real color, and the tree's leaves and muck are all white, black, and gray anyways. The way the thing moved was the weirdest part, though. If anyone has watched a hunting spider for a period of time, you'll know what I'm talking about. That delicate, slow motion walk, the way its legs just so everly lightly touch the surface. So slow and clockwork-like, and with a predatory grace that gives off this barely contained feeling of anticipation. Like it could leap up at any moment and sink its fangs into you. Simultaneously precise, delicate, mechanical, fascinating, nerve-wracking, and totally physically wrong. It just glided about like a 20-foot-tall spider, all tips of toes and graceful, soundless brushing, perfect balance and nary a thought to its path. I'll never forget the way it walked. I couldn't tell whether it had 2 legs, 4 legs, 6 legs, or 99 legs with all of the trees that looked just like them. But the lump of shaggy what's-it and crocodilian-shaped head barely even bobbed, so suggesting multiple legs. I basically shat a brick and stood there, just standing, hoping that somehow I could turn into a tree and just watch forever. I was terrified, but not in the way you'd be terrified of a monster. More of the way you would be terrified of aliens or heights, an alert backseat driver fear. The thing was distinctly unspider-like in 2 ways, though. 1, the way in which it moved suggested that. A, it had much better and faster motor skills as it literally strode out of view in only a few instants. B, that it had the apparent ability to ignore closely packed trees, inclines, and rocks. I never actually saw its feet, so I just guessed at them. Nor to this day can I remember what color its eyes were. The thing moved without care or bother, paying nary a thought to its tread, completely unconcerned with terrain that would slow down an expert hiker, soundlessly and effortlessly gliding through the trees. In mid-stride, it cocked its head down and to the left, putting me right in the corner of its gaze. Before I could even react to it obviously seeing me, it simply decided to speed up and sprint out of sight. It avoided me not like an animal who's been found, but like someone moving out of a soon-to-be distasteful situation. Like you would quickly step out of the way of an obnoxious friend with a water gun. It knew I was there, considered me only for a half-second, and just kept going like I wasn't worth whatever effort it was thinking of. Hardly a pause. I was too young, stupid, and fascinated to move out of the way. I simply stood there for this whole maybe second and a half, zoned out of the world around me, but seeing everything lucid and slowly as when you have a near-death experience. As it passed, I caught a sudden, overpowering urge to get the hell out of the grove. On some instinctive level, I recognized that the trees were not safe. The forest was as much something else's element as though you had just jumped back on the boat after seeing a huge shadow go under you while swimming. That same exact eerie feeling of primal fear and alien xenophobic vulnerability. I immediately dashed off down the bank, across the dam, hopped a rock, and was back on the trail just as my friends came around the corner. They saw the rock hopping part, and me being the smooth, compulsive lying bastard I am, I told them I was bored waiting for them, and was hopping rocks in a nervous but surprisingly unshaken voice. I loosened up almost immediately in their company and never bothered to tell them, figuring they would dismiss me as a nutcase. Trip ended uneventfully, and I went home and continued life. Oh yes, and one last thing I forgot to mention is that the second I tried to go to sleep, every dog for 8 blocks all at once started barking their heads off at something. Kept me up half the night, and a person I know commented on it in the morning since she lives close.
Yesterday I found Texas Guy's thread and was immediately struck by a profound sense of familiarity and dread by his picture. Immediately I felt an odd mix of nostalgia and déjà vu just by looking at these scribbles. Reading his story, it features all of the elements of mine. trees, a creek, a recent storm, and a freaky deaky strider thing. Just reading it, I'm hardcore flashbacking and remembering shit I had nearly repressed completely after 2 years. Just reading the story. I can imagine how him and his buddies felt, what they saw, and how they were affected. Unfortunately, I was packing up and getting ready to leave to go out with some friends, so I had to be very quick and blunt, ascertaining the creature he spoke of was the same. They described it physically a little differently, but the way he was struck by its gait and otherworldly cross-country ability struck a deep chord with how I felt, and I resolved immediately to go back to Beaver Creek, find it again, and tell everyone about it tonight. Unfortunately, tonight, there were so few clouds and the creek was so low there was next to no water anywhere, and maybe consequently I saw shit nothing. I gave up far earlier than my expected time because the forest life was all getting ready for winter, and partly because there was apparently a flood that eroded the bank a while ago and parts of several trails were closed off with signs. On my way back, however, I felt for a moment an unbearable strong feeling of some shit's watching you. So bad I could literally feel the gaze drill into my back. A wave of reflexive panic nearing a seizure went up and down my legs and every hair on my body jumped to attention. But my reflex wasn't to swivel around. It was some other reflex where your body can do nothing but stand still. Not out of fear, but out of pure evolutionary, what's good for you, like taking your hand off of a hot stove. Apparently my instincts figured this one was a no-brainer. A few seconds pass, nothing happens, and I power walk right back to the car, because if I run at this point I know I won't stop, get back in and go straight back out the gravel parking lot and out back to town, skipping the center like on the way in. I have no way to know it was even the creature. It could have been a zillion other more likely things, but on the drive back I just felt this slow, easy relaxation, heart slowing down, adrenaline dying out, like you just nearly fell off a cliff. Not a dangerous feeling, but a close call with the bad. The great unknown bad things that you don't directly associate with any specific bodily harm, just fear and bad things. That, if anything, is the only reason I bothered to mention this at all. There, now I'm done. Make of it what you will, but I have pages upon pages of stilt-legged things scribbled in the margin of my high school binders from years before, and failed 3D models, spore creatures, and paintings that I threw aside because I just couldn't capture the captivating, terrifying, infinitely delicate clockwork feel of action so effortlessly exuding from the thing simply walking by.
This probably isn't X's usual fare, but I thought I might relate a weird thing that happened to me this weekend and see what you guys think. I was out at my grandma's ranch this weekend and my 2 cousins and I were walking around the property with 2 dogs, not on leashes. It was evening, but not so late that things were getting too dark to see. The sky was about halfway through the orange part of sunset. We were headed through a cow pasture towards a gate in the barbed wire fence, which I'd guess would be about 4 feet tall, separating it from the wooded area. We were basically walking along a path with the fence and trees on our right and the cow's drinking lake on our left. The dogs were a bit ahead of us, when suddenly they both turned around to face behind us and started barking. My cousin and I both turned around and saw some kind of creature, like a horse or a dog, covered in long, shaggy black or dark brown fur with extremely long legs. I'm talking like the head and body were somewhere between the size of a large dog and a small horse, but the legs were easily twice as long as a human is tall. I don't know how long it had been there, but it was staring at us and the dogs and was mostly frozen and was on our side of the barbed wire fence, facing away from the woods. I'm guessing it had just walked straight over the fence, heard the dogs barking and froze. The dog started to run towards it. It sort of buckled down on its humongous legs to bring its head down to ground level and made this massive snorting noise, and both the dogs stopped in their tracks and bolted straight into the lake. One cousin said they yelped like they were hurt when it did that, but I don't remember that. Then it just turned around and strode back over the fence and into the woods. I honestly don't remember what we did. I don't think we screamed or anything. I think we just kind of froze up. When it was gone, we bolted back to the ranch and told my grandma. She was just sort of dismissive of the whole thing and said there were all sorts of animals out there and didn't want to bother the sheriff with it. She was treating it like we got scared by a deer and our minds were playing tricks on us or something. But we all agreed it didn't even jump to clear the fence. It just walked over like it was nothing. and we all saw that it had really long hair. That's honestly it. Not overtly paranormal, but certainly terrifying.
I think it's simply an undiscovered or newly emerging or near-extinct species. Most sightings have been in Middle Texas to maybe upper to mid-Mexico region, usually in forest hill areas, although there have been sightings with similar descriptions in other areas of the world. I think the Stiltwalker link and the earlier posts more closely describes what is in the Texas-Mexico region. It's important to consider. Landscape. It's usually sighted in hills or along paths, not dense wooded flatland. Also, what other animals live in the area? What could it be eating or eating it? I'm from San Antonio, Texas, and in my part of town in the woods, there's deer, coyotes, possums, wild rabbits, skunks. I've seen a few armadillos. There's a wide variety of wild birds. Also, I think it's more specific to my area, but there are a lot of bats around here. And they attract the owls, which I can hear whooing at night, and it's eerily relaxing.
I wouldn't describe the area around my grandma's ranch as particularly hilly, but it's not super flat either. Actually, on the property on the other side of the road, there are some pretty big hills, steep enough that a four-wheeler has to strain. Other animals are skunks and possums and armadillos and coyotes and snakes. No bigger predators like bears or wolves that I know of. My grandma claims there's a panther out here too. I've seen owls and bats too, but not in huge abundance.
Wow, I have seen the same thing. I live in San Antonio, Texas. I was walking home, taking a shortcut through the woods with a friend, and kind of like you guys said, it was along a tree-lined path. But the path is like a bit elevated, and on the other side is just a huge slope. So we see this thing in front of us on the path, and it notices us and runs down this huge, like 20-foot steep slope, and darts across the field on the other side. Like no problem. It was amazing how much distance it could cover in such a short time, and silent too. But it scared the shit out of me and my friend. I've done a bit of research on these things, and there isn't a lot of hard info, mostly just witness stories and such. But one thing I did notice is they're usually sighted in wooded areas, along a path or hills and slope areas with woods. I think they are nocturnal, and their long legs makes hill climbing easy.
Be last Christmas. Be driving through rural Texas at 4 a.m. to visit girlfriend's family. See a dude walking on the side of the road, literally 50 or 60 miles from any civilization whatsoever. My girlfriend and the rest of the people in the car tell me to slow down. I don't want to give this weirdo a ride. Get closer to him and realize that it's not a person. It's about 6 or 7 feet tall, walking on all fours. Arm and leg length are disproportionate to the body. Furry, looks like some terrifying coyote beast. Freaked out. I for some reason decided to drive slowly past it. Has the head of a human being. Everyone in the car starts screaming and crying. Just before peeling out, its head snaps right in our direction. I have no idea what the hell it was, but I have still not recovered from seeing it. I don't drive at night anymore, unless it's in the city. Basically terrified of any type of woods too, even if they're full of people.
This happened about 4 years ago in the fall. I was born in and still live in Lewisberry, Pennsylvania. Most nights than not, I will drive down to New Cumberland for a cold beer and some darts. And one night, in October 20th, 12 was no different. On the return trip, not long after midnight, I was on Route 382, headed east towards Lewisberry. As I was approaching John Brenneman's place up on the right, just before Brenneman Drive, I saw someone walking towards me along the side of the road. True, it was late, but it was rather mild for October, so it wasn't out of the question that someone might be walking along the road. What was odd is that he was quite tall, 6'6" or taller, and really, really thin. In the few seconds I was looking at him, I noticed that he seemed to be dressed all in black, with black pants, a tight black trench coat, Very, very dark skin and short dark hair. He was either limping or having trouble walking. As I debated slowing down, maybe someone had had an accident. He dropped down to all fours and quickly scampered across the road in front of me. He has a face that was, as I said, coal black with a cross between human and canine face. And then he was gone. When I got home, I hadn't really thought much about it, but over the next day or two, it really started to give me the creeps. I didn't say anything to anyone for a few days, then told a few close friends. Being self-employed and fearing derision, I was reticent to make much ado about it. Although I have always been an enthusiast of the paranormal, cryptozoology, ghosts and such, I have always been a dyed-in-the-wool skeptic. I can't explain what I saw or begin to postulate what it was. I only know I saw it, and it creeps me out. Pic of Texas Stiltwalker included for reference.
Yes, indeed, I've seen the Stiltwalker a few times. I live on a small ranch without about 100 cattle running on 40 acres in what basically amounts to vegetation desert, but is fairly near a good-sized tributary. As you might imagine, we put out hay most of the year for the cattle. Cattle are fairly predictable, and they know what time you feed them and off what time to eat. I've been lucky enough that about 3 times in the past 5 years they've alerted me that something else was at their fodder. They gather near the barn and moo. The first time I rolled out on my ATV with a gun and was shocked. A slim, shaggy-haired something dodged into the brush. The following times I was a bit quieter. I saw a long, gangly, hairy animal acting much as you would expect a cow, but nothing was prepared to approach it. I did nothing. I was too enraptured by the animal to do much but watch until it apparently caught my scent and ran. I don't feel malice from the creatures, and I know there are more because once I saw one with a juvenile. I simply feel, much as the cattle must, that they were here first.
1 month later.
I've experienced some strange shit on my ranch, but I would describe it as a carnivorous Texas Stiltwalker more than a skinwalker. It seems to mainly like to eat the wildlife and my farm animals strangely. I've only seen it a handful of times, but it's easy to see where it's been or what it's done. I even sent in a clump of hair to the lab to DNA analyze what animal it's from at great expense, only to have returned that they lost my sample. Yeah/X/ probably doesn't remember me at all, but I first started encountering this thing roughly 6 years ago when I moved out here. In that time, I have done a few things to try to figure out what it was or prove it is here. I have come to be resigned that anything official is being suppressed. I have sent 2 snaggles of hair off for DNA processing via the local college SIU. One was lost. The other came back as an opossum. However, I am 100% sure it was not the hair of an opossum. I set up motion-sensing video recording devices for a couple of years, but it has exceptionally long limbs, and I only have a few strange swooshes captured, which I showed /X/ back in the day. These days, I have come to expect that I will find many small to medium dead creatures on my property, and that it doesn't seem to bother the cows, rather it seems to converge with them. We just call it the Stiltwalker, and live well enough in harmony with it. I have never experienced it super close hand, but I'm the nerd of the family who likes /X/, so I'm the one who tried to capture evidence of it. For what it's worth, when I did post the swoops, /X/ told me to go fuck myself and get better equipment, so I kinda gave up on talking about it, but it has continued to be a part of our year, most especially in the winter when the cows are in heat and wild forage is sparse. You find smashed and gutted coyotes and medium creatures, which does include chickens I may have. The only member of my family to have a close encounter with it is my great-uncle. 2 years ago, in the middle of winter, he was pushing out a large round bale for some of the cows. In their rush, the cows pushed him to the ground, which broke his hip. He was completely stuck on the ground and miles out and too old to fuck with cell phones, so he wasn't discovered until late that night when I heard his calls off the back porch. He says that the Stiltwalker arrived about an hour after his fall, when he was growing too weak to push the cattle away from his side of the bale. He said that it approached the bale and stood directly over him, taking huge chomps from the bale but preventing the livestock from crushing him. So whatever it is omnivorous and seems to recognize and even act benevolently in the event that something on the farm is endangered, aside from chickens. Part of the reason I've grown to respect it and stopped trying to prove we have a cryptid the government needs to sample or anything. He said it smelled very yeasty, like it was fermenting sourdough in its long, coarse hair. He's literally 98 though, so who knows?
I commute for my job. It's a retail job, but I live in a rural area in the Southern California foothills, and it is currently my only option. I drive home every night near 1 a.m. when I take the highway. It's always deserted at these times, and some nights were more peculiar than others, but nothing so extreme as this incident. It's not uncommon for me to see a lot of wildlife on these drives. I would just take it slow and be alert. Occasionally I'd see a black-tailed deer, coyotes, raccoons, etc. One recent night, I was only about 10 minutes away from home. I rolled up to the usual four-way stop that I had stopped at hundreds of times before. Not a soul around. As I came to a complete stop, I saw something standing just off the side of the road across from the intersection. It was obviously an animal and it was headed toward the road, so I was going to wait for it to cross. It took me a second to really comprehend what it was at first. I thought it was a horse, which, although dangerous, wouldn't be that uncommon for where I live due to irresponsible ranchers and their constantly broken fences. Then, as I started to be able to make out more of what it was as it neared the light from my headlights, I realized something was very wrong with this animal. It was tall, so much so that the legs looked stilt-like. As I sat there shocked, it slowly stepped into the road and came across my car's direct beam of my headlight. At this point, I realized two things. One, it was much taller than my car. Its height was monstrous. Two, its gait was very odd, almost like it didn't know how to properly walk as a deer should. It was like all of its joints wanted to bend the wrong way. It moved slowly into the oncoming lane and then swiveled its head to look back at me. All of the hair on my body rose. What spooked me the most was that this was certainly a deer, or at least something that looked like one. It looked normal in every way except the spider-like legs it was standing on. At this point I gasped it, and then the deer stood unmoving as my car sped past. I looked back in my rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of it crossing the oncoming lane back into the shoulder of the highway, illuminated red by my brake lights. When I got home, I ran into my house and locked myself in. I'm still understandably freaked out.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.